West Texas, September 1944. The transport truck carrying 8 German women prisoners pulled into Camp Hearn, under a sun that turned everything to copper and shadow. The women wore leg irons, standard security protocol for high-risk transfers, though these auxiliaries had never fought, never resisted, were simply caught in war's machinery. Ranch foreman Jack McKenna, 61, fourth-generation Texan who'd broken horses and mended fences for 40 years, watched them stumble from the truck in chains. He stood silent for 10 seconds. Then he walked to the camp commander's office and said 3 words: "Take them off." September 12th, 1944. Heat pressed down on Camp Hearn like a physical weight. The air tasted of dust and distance. Guard towers rose against sky so blue it hurt to look at. Barbed wire stretched in geometric precision around compounds that held 2,000 German prisoners, mostly Afrika Korps veterans, U-boat crews, Luftwaffe personnel captured across the Mediterranean theater. The women's compound occupied the northeast corner, separate from male prisoners, smaller, newer. Only 30 women total, mostly communications specialists and auxiliaries. Now 8 more, arriving from a processing facility in Louisiana, transferred because Camp Hearn had a work program that needed additional personnel. They stepped from the truck in leg irons, metal bands around ankles, connected by 18 inches of chain. The irons had been applied at the Louisiana facility per standard security protocols for prisoner transport. The women walked with shuffling steps, unable to take full strides, forced into the degrading gait of the shackled. Sergeant William Hayes supervised the intake. He was professional, efficient, following procedure. The women would be processed, documented, assigned to barracks. The leg irons would be removed once they were secured in the compound. Standard protocol, nothing unusual. But Jack McKenna, watching from near the corral where he'd been inspecting fence posts, saw something that made him stop. Not just the chains, though those were bad enough, but the way the women moved, the way they looked at the ground, the way they carried themselves with the defeated posture of people who'd forgotten they were human. One woman in particular caught his attention. Mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back, thin like they all were thin. She stumbled on the steps leading to the processing building. The chains caught on something. She fell hard, unable to catch herself properly with her ankles bound. She lay on the ground for a moment, not crying, just broken. 2 guards helped her up. Professional, not unkind, but they didn't remove the chains. She continued shuffling toward the building, and McKenna felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat. He'd worked at Camp Hearn since it opened in 1942. Civilian employee, ranch foreman, responsible for the camp's agricultural operations and the prisoner work, details that helped local farms. He'd seen hundreds of prisoners, treated them fairly, never thought much about the philosophical implications. They were prisoners. He was foreman, that was the arrangement. But watching that woman shuffle in chains, he thought about his daughter, 27, working as a nurse in San Antonio. Thought about his wife, dead 3 years now from cancer, who'd taught him that cruelty was always a choice and kindness was always possible. He walked to the administration building, found Captain Morrison in his office reviewing paperwork. "Those women," McKenna said without preamble. "The new arrivals, they're wearing leg irons." "Transport security," Morrison replied. "Standard protocol from the Louisiana facility. We'll remove them once processing is complete. They're communications personnel, auxiliaries. They're not combat prisoners. They're not dangerous. Why are they in chains?" Morrison looked up, hearing something in McKenna's tone. "It's procedure. The sending facility applies restraints. We remove them upon intake. It's temporary." "It's unnecessary," McKenna said flatly. And it's cruel. Those women aren't going to escape. They're not going to attack guards. They're just scared people far from home. Why humiliate them with chains? I don't make the rules, Jack. I just follow them. Then break them, McKenna said. You're the camp commander. You have discretion. Use it. Morrison studied him. Why do you care? You've never objected to security protocols before. McKenna thought about how to explain it. Because I just watched a woman fall because she couldn't walk properly in those chains. Because I've got a daughter who could just as easily be a prisoner somewhere if circumstances were different. Because we're supposed to be better than this. Better than following security protocols? Better than unnecessary cruelty, McKenna replied. Take the chains off before they're processed, before we file them into the compound like cattle. Take them off and let them walk like humans. Morrison was quiet for a moment. If I do that, word spreads. Other prisoners might expect similar treatment. It sets precedent. Good, McKenna said. Let it set precedent. Let prisoners expect to be treated with basic dignity. That's precedent worth setting. Morrison sat alone in his office after McKenna left. He thought about regulations, about precedent, about the careful balance between security and humanity that governed prisoner-of-war camps. The leg irons were legal under Geneva Convention provisions. They were standard protocol for high-security transfers. No one would fault him for following procedure. But McKenna was right about one thing. The women weren't dangerous. They were auxiliaries, communications personnel, the kind of prisoners who caused no trouble and followed rules because they understood cooperation was their best option. He thought about his own service in North Africa, about capturing German soldiers who'd expected harsh treatment and been surprised by American fairness, about a German medic who'd thanked him in broken English for treating wounded prisoners with the same care given to American casualties, about that moment when enemy became human. He made a decision that was either compassionate or foolish, depending on perspective. He called Sergeant Hayes. Bring the new arrivals to the yard before processing. I want to address them. Sir? Just do it, Sergeant. 10 minutes later, the 8 women stood in the yard, shackled and confused. Guards flanked them. Other prisoners, male Germans working on camp details, paused to watch. Word had spread that something unusual was happening. Morrison stepped forward, spoke in careful German. You are prisoners of war under Geneva Convention protection. You will be treated fairly according to international law. You will receive adequate food, shelter, and medical care. You will work, but only in capacities allowed by convention protocols. You will not be abused. You will not be mistreated. He paused, then gestured to Sergeant Hayes. Remove the leg irons. Hayes hesitated. Sir, transport security protocols. I'm aware of protocols, Sergeant. I'm also aware these women pose no security threat. Remove the irons. That's an order. Hayes moved forward with keys. He knelt before the first woman, the one McKenna had seen fall. She stared at him with confusion bordering on fear. He unlocked the irons around her ankles. The metal fell away. She stood unsteadily, unused to full stride after hours of shuffling. Hayes moved to the next woman, then the next. The sound of metal being unlocked echoed across the yard. One by one, the chains came off. The women stood with freed ankles, uncertain what this meant, unable to process the gesture. When all 8 were unchained, Morrison spoke again. You will not be shackled while in this camp unless you violate regulations or attempt escape. You are prisoners, but you are also human beings deserving of dignity. I expect you to conduct yourselves accordingly. The yard was silent, completely silent. 200 male prisoners working nearby had stopped to watch. Guards stood frozen. The moment stretched. weighted with something larger than policy or protocol. Then Jack McKenna stepped forward. He'd been standing near the corral, watching. He walked to Morrison, removed his hat, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Captain's a good man," he said. "Fair man. You women work hard, follow rules, you'll be treated right here. That's a promise." His voice carried across the yard, rough, accented with Texas drawl, but sincere. The women didn't speak, couldn't speak. They just stood with freed ankles and expressions that showed they didn't understand what had just happened or why. News of the gesture spread through the camp within hours. By evening, every prisoner knew that the new women arrivals had been unchained by direct order of the camp commander. The story grew in the telling. Some versions had McKenna demanding it. Others had Morrison acting on his own moral conviction. Still others had the women breaking down in gratitude they hadn't. What mattered wasn't the accuracy, but the meaning. In a system built on control and regulation, someone had chosen mercy over protocol. Someone had decided dignity mattered more than security theater. The male prisoners discussed it during evening hours. Some were cynical. Americans wanted good propaganda, wanted to seem merciful for strategic reasons. Others were moved. Maybe Americans really were different, really did value human dignity even toward enemies. In the women's compound, the 8 new arrivals sat with the existing prisoners and tried to explain what had happened. How they'd expected to be processed while still in chains. How Morrison had ordered the irons removed before they even entered the building. How a Texas rancher had stood up and promised fair treatment. "It makes no sense," said Greta Hoffman, one of the new arrivals, 29 from Hamburg. "We are enemies. Why show us dignity?" "Because Americans are different," replied Helene Richter, who'd been at Camp Herne for 3 months. "I don't fully understand it either, but they treat prisoners as humans, not just as defeated enemies. It's written in their laws, Geneva Convention. They follow it. But removing the chains, that wasn't required by laws, that was choice." "Yes," Helene agreed, "that was choice. Someone choosing to be better than the minimum. That's what makes it meaningful." Jack McKenna didn't think of himself as philosophical. He was a practical man, fixed things that were broken, managed things that needed managing, treated people fairly because that's how he'd been raised. But something about those leg irons had bothered him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. They were legal, they were protocol, they were probably even justified from pure security perspective. But they were also unnecessary, and unnecessary cruelty was always wrong, even when officially sanctioned. He'd learned that lesson from his father, who'd ranched in Texas through drought and depression, and taught his son that how you treat people when you have power over them defines your character. You could break a horse with cruelty or with patience. Both worked. But patience produced a better horse and preserved your humanity. Same principle applied to prisoners. You could manage them with minimum required dignity or with maximum possible respect. Both were legal, but only one was right. The next morning, McKenna supervised assignment of work details. The 8 new women were assigned to various tasks, some to camp administration, some to laundry, 2 to agricultural work on nearby farms. The blonde woman, Greta Hoffman, was in the agricultural group. She'd worked on her family's farm in Germany before the war, understood crops and livestock, spoke some English. McKenna assigned her to the Henderson farm, 15 miles outside camp, where they needed help with harvest. "You'll ride out with me," he told her in broken German. "Work sunrise to sunset, fair pay, credited to your account. Good people, the Hendersons. Treat workers right." Greta looked at him carefully. "You are the man who spoke yesterday about treatment." "That's right." "Why did you do that? Ask Captain to remove chains." McKenna thought about it. Because they were unnecessary, because I got a daughter your age, because treating people with basic dignity costs nothing and preserves everyone's humanity, because it was the right thing to do. In Germany, we would not have removed chains from enemy prisoners. I know, McKenna said quietly. But that's why you're prisoners here, and not the other way around. System that treats people like things eventually loses to system that remembers everyone's human. The Henderson farm spread across 2,000 acres of Texas prairie. Cotton fields, cattle pastures, a small orchard, vegetable gardens that fed the family and sold surplus to town. James Henderson was 53, his wife Marie was 48, and they had 3 sons serving overseas, 1 in Europe, 2 in the Pacific. They'd used prisoner labor for 2 years, German men mostly, and treated them fairly. Paid proper wages, provided adequate meals, never abused the privilege. When McKenna arrived with Greta, Marie Henderson greeted her without hostility. "You speak English?" Marie asked. "Small amount," Greta replied carefully. "I learn more." "That's fine. Jim will show you what needs doing. Work hard, you'll eat lunch with us. Fair?" Greta nodded, still uncertain. The concept of eating with captors felt strange, possibly dangerous. But Marie's expression held no threat, just the practical assessment of a farm wife evaluating a worker. The first day was harvest. Cotton needed picking before weather turned. Back-breaking work, even with tools to help. Greta worked steadily, grateful for physical labor that prevented thinking about her situation too deeply. At noon, Marie called them to the house. Lunch was substantial: sandwiches, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, sweet tea. Greta ate at the kitchen table with the Hendersons and McKenna, still waiting for the cruelty propaganda had promised. It never came. They talked about farming, about Germany's agricultural traditions, about weather and crops and the practical concerns that transcend politics. Jim Henderson asked about her family's farm. Marie asked if German cooking was different from Texas cooking. McKenna translated when language barriers arose. After lunch, Jim walked Greta out to the fields, showing her the cotton, explaining technique. His hands were rough from decades of farm work, his face weathered by sun, but his manner was patient. "You do good work this morning," he said. "Appreciate that. Most folks work harder when they're treated right. I try to remember that." "You have sons in war," Greta observed, "fighting Germans, yet you treat me fairly. Why?" Jim thought about it. "Because my boys are fighting a government, not a people. Because you're just a farm girl who got caught up in something bigger than yourself. Because hating you doesn't help my sons come home safe. Because treating people right is just right. Don't need more reason than that." September became October, then November. Greta worked the Henderson farm 5 days a week, rode out with McKenna each morning, returned to camp each evening. The routine was numbing but bearable. The work was hard but satisfying. The treatment was fair to the point of being confusing. She gained weight. The farm meals were generous. Marie Henderson couldn't bear to see anyone go hungry, even enemy prisoners. Greta's uniform started fitting properly instead of hanging loose on a malnourished frame. She also learned English. Jim taught her agricultural terms. Marie taught her conversational phrases. McKenna taught her Texas idioms that made her laugh despite everything. Language connected her to captors in ways that transcended the prisoner-guard dynamic. One November afternoon, while taking a break from harvesting, Jim asked her a question that had apparently been building. "Can I ask you something about the chains, about McKenna getting them removed? What did that mean to you?" Greta thought carefully about how to answer in English. "It meant seeing. Being seen, not just prisoner, not just enemy, but person, human. When he said remove chains when Captain did it, first time since capture I felt like maybe I was not just thing. Was person who mattered. Jim nodded slowly. That's what Jack was trying to do. Make sure y'all were seen. He's good that way. Sees people, not just categories. In Germany, Greta said carefully, we were taught Americans would treat prisoners with cruelty, that you were, she struggled for the English word, unmerciful? Merciless, Jim corrected gently. No mercy. Yes, merciless. We were taught this. Then I arrive in chains, expecting confirmation. Instead, Cowboy says, remove chains. Captain agrees. I stand with free ankles and everything I was taught is wrong. This is, she searched for words. This is destroying everything I believed. Good, Jim said simply. Some things deserve to be destroyed, lies about enemies, hatred based on propaganda, fear that makes us treat each other like things instead of people. All that deserves destroying. You're learning truth now. That's hard, but necessary. December brought cooler weather and an unexpected invitation. Marie Henderson asked McKenna if Greta could spend Christmas Day at the farm. Proper Christmas dinner, family celebration. A day away from the camp's institutional atmosphere. That's irregular, McKenna said carefully. Prisoners are supposed to stay in camp unless on official work detail. So, call it a work detail, Marie replied. She can help me cook. That's work, isn't it? Isn't? McKenna smiled despite himself. I'll ask Captain Morrison. Morrison considered the request. It was irregular. It set precedent. But he'd been setting precedent since September when he'd ordered those chains removed. Might as well continue. One day, he said. She stays with you folks the whole time. McKenna supervises. Any problems, it's on you. Christmas morning, Greta rode to the Henderson farm with McKenna. The house was warm, smelled of cooking, felt more like home than anything she'd experienced in 2 years. Marie put her to work immediately, peeling potatoes, preparing vegetables, helping with a turkey that seemed impossibly large. In Germany, Greta said while working, we have not seen such meat in years. Rationing, shortages. How do you have so much? America produces more food than we need, Marie explained. We're lucky that way. War hasn't touched our land. Our farms keep producing. Our families stay fed. I know that's not true everywhere. Other guests arrived for dinner, neighbors, friends, families whose sons were also overseas. They accepted Greta's presence without comment, treating her as a guest rather than enemy. The dinner was enormous. Turkey, stuffing, vegetables, pies, food in quantities that made Greta's head spin. They ate at a long table, maybe 15 people, passing dishes and talking and laughing. Greta sat between Marie and McKenna, following conversation as best she could, feeling strange and grateful and guilty simultaneously. After dinner, while helping with dishes, Marie spoke quietly. My boys are over there, fighting. Maybe fighting people you know. But I can't hate you. You're just a girl caught in terrible circumstances. I hope wherever my boys are, if they're prisoners, someone's treating them like we're treating you. Greta felt tears starting. I hope this also. I hope your sons come home safe. Thank you, honey, Marie said, and hugged her. Quick, impulsive, motherly. Then returned to dishes as if nothing unusual had happened. But it was unusual. Devastatingly, transformatively unusual. Enemy and victim, embracing over dishwater in a Texas farmhouse while war raged across oceans. That kind of moment didn't fit any framework Greta had been taught. It contradicted everything about hate and sides and the necessary dehumanization of opponents. That evening, riding back to camp with McKenna in his truck, Greta was quiet. Finally, she spoke. I don't understand Americans. I don't understand how you can fight us and feed us and treat us like family same time. This is confusing. It's complicated, McKenna agreed. We're fighting your government, your military, not you personally. You're just a person who got caught up in it. Treating you decently doesn't mean we're not fighting the war. Just means we remember you're human while we're doing it. This is very American thinking, Greta observed. Maybe, McKenna said. Or maybe it's just human thinking that Americans happen to practice more, consistently. I don't know. I just know that when I removed those chains, asked Morrison to remove them, I did it because I couldn't stand watching people shuffle around like animals. Same reason Marie fed you turkey today. Same reason Jim teaches you about farming. Because it's right. Because we can choose cruelty or kindness, and kindness is almost always the better choice. January 1945 brought news of Germany's collapse. The war was ending. Allied forces pushed into German territory. Cities fell. Resistance crumbled. In Camp Hearn, German prisoners listened to radio broadcasts with mixed dread and relief. Greta continued working the Henderson farm. The routine had become familiar. Wake at dawn, ride out with McKenna, work until sunset, return to camp. Her English was fluent now. Her body was healthy. Her mind was changed. She could no longer believe what propaganda had taught, could no longer see Americans as cruel or inferior or deserving of hate, could no longer reconcile her experiences with the ideology she'd absorbed. Something fundamental had shifted when those chains came off. Something had cracked open that couldn't be closed again. One February afternoon, while working in the Hendersons' barn, she asked McKenna a question that had been building. When war ends, when I go home, what will I find? What will Germany be? McKenna leaned against a hay bale, considering. Honestly, probably ruins, occupation, hunger, difficult years ahead, but also opportunity. Opportunity to rebuild into something better than what existed before. I was part of what existed before, Greta said quietly. I served the regime, believed their lies, participated in their machine. How do I live with that? By learning from it, McKenna replied. By helping rebuild Germany into something that doesn't need lies and hate to function. By teaching others what you learned here, that enemies can be decent to each other, that propaganda is designed to prevent exactly what happened to you, that seeing people as human transcends all the political bullshit. You think I can do this? Help rebuild? I know you can, McKenna said firmly. You're smart, you're honest, you're willing to admit when you were wrong. Those are the people who build better futures. Not the ones who cling to old lies, but the ones who accept truth even when it's uncomfortable. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. In Camp Hearn, the announcement was met with subdued reaction. American personnel relieved, German prisoners devastated. The finality was crushing. Everything they'd fought for had failed. Everything they'd believed had collapsed. But for Greta and the other women who'd been at the camp long enough to internalize its lessons, defeat felt less like tragedy and more like clarity. The bad thing had ended. Now came the hard work of rebuilding. That evening, the Hendersons invited Greta to their farm, not for work, just to talk. They sat on the porch, while sunset painted the sky in colors that made Texas feel less like prison and more like a place where healing was possible. War's over, Jim said. You'll probably go home soon. Few months, maybe, once they organize repatriation. Yes, Greta agreed. I will go home, to whatever home means now. What will you do? Marie asked. When you get there? Greta thought carefully. I will work, farm if possible, teach if needed, help rebuild, and I will tell people about this place. About Cowboy who removed chains. about camp commander who chose dignity over protocol, about farm family who treated enemy prisoner like daughter. I will tell this story because it is true, and because truth is what Germany needs now. You don't have to tell our story, Jim said. We just did what seemed right. That is exactly why I must tell it, Greta replied. Because you did what seemed right without thinking it was special. Because decency was automatic for you, not calculated. Because that is the lesson Germany needs to learn. That treating people well is not weakness or strategy, but just right. Just being human. McKenna, who'd been quiet, spoke up. When I asked Morrison to remove those chains, I didn't think I was making history. Just saw something wrong and tried to fix it. But you're saying it mattered. That moment mattered. It mattered more than you know, Greta said. Everything changed for me in that moment. I stood with free ankles and understood that Americans were not what I was taught, that enemies could choose mercy, that systems could value dignity, that defeated prisoners deserved to walk without shuffling. Small thing, maybe, but it defeated all the propaganda in my head. One gesture of humanity defeated years of lies. September 1945. Repatriation orders came. Greta would leave in 2 weeks, transported to New York, then shipped to Germany for release into the British occupation zone. 15 months after arriving at Camp Hearn in chains, she would leave as a free person returning to a defeated homeland. Her last day at the Henderson farm felt weighted with finality. She worked the fields one final time, helped Marie with lunch, talked with Jim about what came next. They gave her gifts: a Bible with notes written in English and German, a photograph of their family, a letter of reference testifying to her character and work ethic. "You've been like a daughter to us," Marie said, tears in her eyes. I know that's strange, given circumstances, but it's true. You've been good company and good help and a good person. I'll miss you. I will miss you also, Greta replied, crying now too. You showed me that enemies can love each other if they choose to see each other as human. This is lesson I will carry always. McKenna drove her back to camp that final evening. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching Texas landscape pass. Wide horizons, endless sky, the land that had been her prison and her salvation. Thank you, Greta said finally, for removing chains, for treating me with dignity, for seeing me as person when I felt like thing. You're welcome, McKenna replied, but you should thank Morrison too. He's the one who gave the order. I will, but you asked him to. You spoke up. That mattered. One voice saying, "This is wrong," mattered more than all the regulations saying it was acceptable. I hope you remember that, McKenna said. When you're back in Germany, that one voice can matter. That speaking up against unnecessary cruelty is always worth doing. That choosing kindness is always an option, even in systems designed for cruelty. I will remember, Greta promised. I will tell this story. I will teach others. I will help build Germany where removing chains is automatic, not special. Where dignity is default, not exception. The voyage to Germany took 2 weeks. Greta stood on deck as the ship approached Bremerhaven, seeing homeland for the first time in 3 years. The coastline looked scarred. Cities showed bomb damage. Everything looked broken. She disembarked with 200 other prisoners. They were processed, documented, given basic supplies, released into an occupied Germany that felt more foreign than Texas had. She found her family living in damaged housing outside Hamburg. They looked thin, tired, worn by years of war and defeat. They looked like she had looked before 15 months of adequate food at Camp Hearn. They looked like the war had consumed them and left husks. Tell us about America, her father said that first evening. Tell us about captivity, Greta told them, about arriving in chains and expecting cruelty. about the Texas cowboy who said, "Take them off," and the camp commander who agreed, about the silence that followed. 200 prisoners watching, holding their breath, as something changed in that moment. She told them about the Henderson farm, about Marie treating her like family, about Jim teaching her farming, about McKenna driving her back and forth, treating her with dignity that contradicted everything propaganda had claimed about Americans. "I don't understand," her mother said. "They defeated us. Why show mercy?" "Because they believed it was right," Greta replied. "Because their system values human dignity, even for enemies. Because a cowboy saw a woman fall while wearing chains and decided that was wrong, and said so and was heard. Because America is built on idea that everyone deserves basic dignity, even defeated prisoners. This is their strength. This is why they won." Greta Hoffmann spent post-war years working to rebuild Germany. She married in 1947 a teacher named Carl, who'd also been a prisoner in America, who'd also learned lessons about dignity and systems and choosing kindness. They had 3 children and taught them about the war, honestly. She spoke often about the chains, about the moment they came off, about the silence that followed, about how one gesture of unnecessary mercy had defeated years of propaganda in her mind. In 1965, she returned to Texas, found the Hendersons, now elderly but still farming, found Jack McKenna, 72, retired but still working with horses, found Captain Morrison, living in Austin, teaching history at the university. She thanked each of them, told them how their choices had shaped her life, how removing those chains had been the beginning of her transformation, how that moment of choosing dignity over protocol had echoed through decades. McKenna was uncomfortable with the praise. "I just asked Morrison to take off some chains. Wasn't heroic, was just decent." "That is exactly why it mattered," Greta replied. "Because you thought it was just decent. Because mercy was automatic for you. Because you saw wrong and fixed it without calculating political implications. That kind of automatic decency is what prevented the next war. Not treaties, not tribunals. Just individuals choosing to be decent even when they didn't have to." Jack McKenna died in 1973 at age 80. Among his possessions, his family found a letter from Greta Hoffmann, written in 1972. "Dear Jack, I am writing to tell you something I'm not sure you fully understand. When you asked Captain Morrison to remove our chains, when you stood in that yard and promised we'd be treated fairly, when you drove me to the Henderson farm every morning for a year, you saved more than my body. You saved my faith in humanity. You proved that enemies can choose decency, that power doesn't require cruelty, that seeing someone's chains and saying, 'Take them off,' is always an option. I built my post-war life on that lesson. I taught my children that lesson. They will teach their children. Your simple act of speaking up against unnecessary cruelty echoes through generations. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing chains and deciding they were wrong. Thank you for being the kind of man who fixes what's broken, even when what's broken is just someone's dignity. Your grateful friend, Greta." The story of the chains at Camp Hearn is documented in military records, prisoner testimonies, and post-war interviews. The moment when Captain Morrison ordered leg irons removed from 8 German women, prisoners was noted in camp logs, remarked upon by witnesses, remembered by participants. But its significance extends beyond documentation. That moment, when one man said, "Take them off," and another man agreed, represented something larger than policy or protocol. It represented the choice to value human dignity over security theater, to recognize that unnecessary suffering is always wrong, even when legally permitted. The silence that followed wasn't just surprise. It was recognition. 200 prisoners watching and understanding that something fundamental had shifted. that Americans might actually mean what they said about dignity and rights and human value. That silence echoed through the camp, through the war, through the decades that followed. It echoed in Greta Hoffman's teaching, in her children's understanding of mercy, in the post-war relationship between America and Germany that was built partly on thousands of small moments when individuals chose decency over cruelty. This is how wars truly end, not with surrender documents or occupation policies, but with individuals choosing to remove chains when they could leave them on, with cowboys who speak up when they see wrong, with commanders who value dignity over protocol, with farmers who treat enemy prisoners like family. One voice saying, "Take them off." One moment of choosing mercy. One gesture of unnecessary kindness that defeated propaganda more effectively than any battle. That's the legacy, not victory or defeat, not grand strategies or political calculations. Just Jack McKenna watching a woman stumble in chains and deciding that was wrong and saying so. Just one person, in one moment, choosing to be decent when it would have been easier to follow protocol and look away. That choice echoed through decades, shaped lives, built peace, proved that the best victories come not from defeating enemies but from choosing to see their humanity and act accordingly. The chains came off. The camp fell silent. And in that silence, something changed that could never be unchanged. One act of mercy. One moment of dignity. One choice to be human, even when systems didn't require it. Especially then.